like there's something that StreamYard gives you, right? I'm pretty sure.
We could try to find that. Yeah.
Yeah. Here, look. Let me see. Feeding the ducks.
We are live, Dan.
We're live?
We're live.
Oh, man.
It's a vibe.
Welcome to the bonfire, folks.
Welcome to the bonfire.
I'll go back to the acoustic. Warm your hands.
Yeah. That's good.
Okay.
Turn that down. Can you turn that down?
Yeah, I can.
That's a little too much acoustic. Yeah.
Is that better?
That's a vibe.
How's my mix?
It's good.
Okay.
Welcome to the Pac-12 celebratory bonfire, boys and girls. If you joined us earlier, you know that there is some breaking news. The Pac-12 effectively defunct by virtue of Oregon and Washington's decision to join the Big Ten. So I suspect there will be news on the Arizona and Arizona State and Utah fronts. Who knows what happens with Oregon State and Washington State and Carroll and Stanford and a whole lot of teams. We don't really want to dwell on the negative here, Dan. We want to dwell on the positive, some of our most fond memories of the Pac-12, some of our most random players in the history of the Pac-12. We have invited folks from college football media far and wide, former players far and wide. This is going to be a little bit like Kramer's old Merv Griffin set. We're just going to see who wanders in and put the show together if we can. So you've got the music in the background. Maybe we can fade that out and talk a little bit about some of your memories. If you are watching this live, this is not going to be a podcast. This is just going to be a stream. We're doing this out of, I don't know. We feel the need to have some closure.
Yeah.
And we feel the need to offer that to the Verballerhood as well. Don't forget to hit subscribe or follow or whatever, whether it's in podcast or YouTube form. Thank you for joining us here on this afternoon, Dan. This probably cuts closest to the bone for you because you're a Southern California kid. Did you grow up a USC fan or a UCLA fan? Or a Florida State fan? I think you were a Florida State
It's
guy.
a good question. I grew up a Florida State fan. In LA, of the LA teams, it was more UCLA than USC. But honestly, because my mom went to Arizona and didn't really care about football in that way, I liked Arizona basketball because they were good. I liked UCLA and Arizona basketball. I was 10. Sue me. USC I never resonated with or didn't resonate with me until I went to Oregon. I had a lot of fun watching the Reggie Bushey, Matt Leinart, that stretch, Carson Palmer. I had a lot of fun with that. But the moment I stepped on Oregon's campus, I was an Oregon fan first and foremost. USC just became a really good football show. So here we go. Here's somebody who's called a bunch of Pac-12 not Pac-10, but Pac-12 games, eating lunch. We're just throwing people on screen. You can let it flow.
Our first guest of the day. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. So we invited Adam, one, because we love Adam, of course. Everybody loves Adam. Nobody who's met Adam doesn't love Adam. Calls Chicago Bulls games, calls NFL games, but used to at ESPN call games from across the country. Have you been to every Pac-12 stadium?
No, I actually never got to go to the Rose Bowl, which is really upsetting for a myriad of reasons.
And now you never will, Adam.
And it will never happen again.
Now it won't happen. But I actually have a beer I'm going to open here. So when you hear Pac-12, because you called, I'm sure you called a lot of games that are memorable, but I remember you called Washington State upsetting USC. I think that's a Sam Darnold USC game.
It was.
Is that amongst your favorite Pac-12 memories? It has to be.
It is 100%. It's one of my favorite college football memories because the build up to the game was really special. It was early in the season, late September. I want to say it was week 4 or 5. And, USC came in as a top 5 team, but Washington State had a little bit of momentum. I want to say they had played Boise State earlier or in the early portions of the season and it picked up a victory. And, people were kind of looking at them. I want to say this was Luke Falk.
That sounds right.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Luke Falk.
Wazoo had that crazy run of quarterbacks in the air raid.
Yep.
Any answer is probably correct.
Yeah. Name a Pullman special, and you'll come up with a potential quarterback during a wild run for Mike Leach at the time. And Washington State, I think, was number 16 coming into that game. It was a Friday night game, so Friday nights were really fun for us. And typically early in the season, you try to get a decent matchup or two. Hey, Bubs. Good to see you, my friend.
Jeff Schwartz. Yep.
Jeff Schwartz, part of the Bonfire.
We're all just sat together. It's okay.
Adam's happy. He's celebrating. Adam's talking about calling the Wazoo upset over USC, if you remember.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which one? This is the best part. We have to...
So yeah, that's right. So this one was 2017. So Washington State's got a little bit of momentum. They're top 20. Friday nights early in the season were typically, we hope these teams are good because we're not going to see them on Friday nights in the second half. Usually of the slate, the schedule would get a little bit leaner as the season would go on Friday nights. But early in the year, you kind of hope and pray that maybe we run into one. And we ran into one. And there was a lot of buildup. Sam Darnold was going to be the number one pick in the upcoming draft. There were Jet fans, or at least fans wearing Jet jerseys that had New York Jets Sam Darnold 1 jerseys that they were showing off. And this is when Todd McShay and Mel Kiper were really starting to put it together, right? Sam Darnold's one of this guy. He's this, he's that. He has the capability of being an NFL quarterback. So you get into this space of, all right, there's a lot of juice to this game. Pullman is the smallest Pac-12 stadium, right? I want to say Martin Stadium, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's actually the smallest in the country.
Smallest in the country,
Power
right?
5. Yeah.
Power 5
smallest
teams,
Power 5 of like 32 or 33,000.
It's so much fun. Like, that's the thing is like, it's fun to go play there. It's crazy. Like, it's wild. Yeah.
So that game, it ends up being a really close game. Comes down to USC driving to try to take the lead after Washington State was unable to get a touchdown on a close play in the end zone. They get a field goal to take the lead. And Sam Darnold's driving, and free man, I want to say it was Jahad Woods.
Great name.
A great name. This is when, is it Alex Grinch?
Yeah.
Right? He was the defensive coordinator for Mike Leach that year. And that was a really good Washington State defense that produced, I think, 1 or 2 NFL draft picks, or at least 1 or 2 NFL players out of their roster. And free man, Jahad Woods, forced fumble, Washington State takes over. That game was meaningful to me because it was like one of the first field stormings I'd ever been a part of on TV. Right?
Yeah.
Like it was crazy. And all I could think of to say, and we had lost, we would lose Rod Bramblett like a year later. But I always kind of like had this in the back of my mind, and I said they're not going to be able to keep him off the field, which was kind of a callback to the Iron Bowl that Rod called, and Rod was right behind me, where I was calling the national radio call, and Rod was right behind me, and I remember that call distinctly, and we took a photo after the game. And then after the game, Dusty Dvorak was my analyst. He knew Mike Leach fairly well from their days in the Big 12. Dusty at Oklahoma, Mike was at Texas Tech. I think Mike had maybe been at Oklahoma for a year or two. And I think they crossed over, and he invited us out to some like bar in Pullman, Washington. So it was myself, Molly McGrath, Dusty Dvorak, and our producer, Kim Belton. And we all joined Jason Greenberg, our associate director. We all joined him and had the most fascinating night. I got to talk to Mike Leach's wife for a long period of time that night. And she kind of told us a story about how she and Mike met at BYU and how it was in the laundry room, and he kept pacing back and forth, trying to muster up the courage to ask her to go to a restaurant that he had a coupon for. And it was just a really fun experience. That was one of the great experiences I had in college football, was that night, that Friday night in Pullman.
So Dan, if I could interject for a second,
Please.
Here's what's going on for people who are watching live. This is the Pac-12 Bonfire. We are sharing memories. We are sharing random players. Really, whatever comes to mind when you think of Pac-12 as a college football fan. We have invited guests from far and wide across media and the sport itself, and you name it. Adam Amin, thank you for sharing your story. Adam's going to hang with us for a bit. We've also got Jeff Schwartz, who's been kind enough to join, who obviously brings a unique perspective to this conversation. Brandon Huffman, noted West Coast recruiting extraordinaire from the 24/7 family of websites, joined us as well here while Adam was giving his take. So the party grows larger, Dan. I've got some sound effects. If people decide they want to name any kind of random player, just like if it comes to you out of nowhere, if you want to
sitting on, who was the Oregon State player?
Sammy Strother.
Sammy Strother. So if you have the ding tie.
Of course. There we go.
So when you think, we'll get to obviously Jeff, by the way, what's your record against Big Ten schools? 1-1, Indiana and
the Indiana game. Oregon has lost 2 non-conference home games in 40 years. And one was Indiana, where we outgained them 490 to 110.
Wow.
Wow.
We turned the ball over. We turned the ball over 7 times. My first ever college football game. I was like, this is not the way I thought this was going to go. And then we beat Michigan in 07. I'm a big fan of Ropati Pituatu, the Washington defensive tackle.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
I mean,
Brandon, you look great, by the way.
Brandon
looks great.
What?
Yeah, Brandon looks great, by the way.
Of course he does. Look at him.
Fantastic, Brandon.
Thank you.
It was I think 1-1. And then, but guess what? Since that, Oregon's beaten Purdue, right? Ohio State, Michigan State. I think that's it. Maybe Nebraska. We beat Nebraska, right?
At home.
At home, we beat Nebraska.
Yeah,
and we beat Michigan the last time we played Michigan.
Yep.
So like
Michigan State. Yep.
Yeah, we're moving up in the world. I like it.
All right, when you think Pac-10, Pac-12, I mean, look, you're from the West Coast, as obviously is Jeff, as am I. What are the names? What are the places? What are the smells? What brings you there?
I mean, do we ignore the fact that Todd Husak won a Pac-10 title and went to the Rose Bowl?
We do not. We celebrate Todd Husak. Yeah.
Yeah. And as a Ventura County guy myself, an 805 guy, I was always a big fan of Keith Smith, played against him in high school. But you can't mention Keith Smith without mentioning Ortiz Jenkins and the infamous flip he did. So I'm going into the 90s a little bit, guys. I'm a little bit older
That's Arizona.
than you guys. So I'm going 90s, but hey, we'll go to the Jeff Schwartz era.
I'll give you Cade McNown. Dude, buddy, I went to 50 games of the Rose Bowl. I give you all the.
I don't want Cade McNown. I want Danny Farmer. I want
Danny Farmer. The JJ Stokes 1992 touchdown against USC. The Skip Hicks double overtime touchdown against USC in 96. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was one of their great running backs as well.
Yes,
I got it. I got it all, man. All this UCLA. I know more about the Bruins history than Oregon. I think.
Hey, I'm old enough to remember when it was still Sharman Shah.
Yes,
so I go way into the bank. The other one for me that I always like to go back to. So my first college football game was in 1982. I was 6 years old, and I went and watched Tom Ramsey from UCLA against John Elway from Stanford.
Wow.
But it was the Granada Hills Kennedy matchup inside the Rose Bowl. And I was hooked. I remember going with my grandpa, and a few months later, he took me to the Rose Bowl, UCLA against Michigan, and many games at the Rose Bowl, many games at the Coliseum to get to see players like, Chris Miller and Larry Parker and Curtis Conway, Johnny Morton. So again, I mean, we're tapping into basically the Calabasas high school coaching staff a few years ago, Dan, but also USC of the early 1990s.
Damn.
Dan, as we're going through some of these names, I'll put some of the other ones that pop up on the screen.
BJ Danker.
JJ, say it for me now. Adam and Dan.
JJ Arthega.
Arthega Whiteside. We've got Scooby Wright.
Naturally.
Scooby Wright getting
Scooby 2 stars. Yeah.
Scooby 2 stars. We got Toby Gerhart.
Here
we go. Keenan Howry.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Long touchdown against Oregon State. Yep.
Kenyon Barner, obviously. Jordan Simone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another one.
Who was the UCLA receiver who committed to like 11 schools? Oh, Jordan Payton. Jordan Payton.
No, Jordan Payton.
Yes. I was a big Freddie Mitchell fan until his leg exploded against Houston.
I believe we've mentioned Hercules Mataafa, but
part of that Alex Grinch-led defensive line for Washington State. That was part of the reason that they were so good that year.
That, by the way, his coaching of Hercules Mataafa is still the reason why USC's defense still stinks. Because he still coaches them like they have a 230-pound defensive tackle instead of the 300-pound guys they have now. It's absolutely insane.
I love the Mike Bercovici reference. Thank you, Broth. Appreciate that.
What are your favorite Pac-10, Pac-12? I don't know if tropes is the right word, but like that ASU always had a 6'11" quarterback. Right? I love that. I love the Rudy Carpenterization.
Oh my God, Rudy Carpenter.
What was his name? Walter?
Yeah.
Andrew Walterization and the Sam, who was the guy who transferred to Nebraska?
Sam Keller.
Sam Kellerization of the ASU quarterback position. That like this school always has this guy.
Yeah, it was Brock Osweiler, but if you go back, it was Steve Campbell, who, gosh, that was late 90s. He was like 6'10". He's a high school coach in Arizona now, coaches the same school that Kyler Casper came from. And I think he still looks like he's 6'10" and can go post up some dudes on a Saturday morning at a park. But He was like the first 7'9" quarterback that Arizona State had.
Who was the UCLA relatively recent, had like a 6'8" tight end who only caught passes in the back of the end zone? Joe Foria?
Joe Fourier.
Joe Foria.
Yeah.
Name.
Yeah.
Was he Brett Hundley's tight end or something?
He sure was.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh,
former Notre Dame tight end, in fact.
Stanford tight ends is another good one. When they had, who were the 3 tight ends, Brandon, at the same time? Stanford had 3 tight ends at the same. Levine Toilolo,
Ryan Hewitt, and Zach Ertz.
Yeah, we got Kirby Fleener before then.
But they
Colby
all
Parkinson
signed,
after.
They all signed in the same class in 2009, and Hewitt ended up playing fullback and then got to the league along with those other 2 guys.
Wow.
And Levine, I remember specifically doing I want to say it was an Atlanta Falcons game, seeing Levine Toilolo and calling him a burgeoning star. And I feel like maybe I overshot it a little bit with Levine Toilolo.
Hey, Jeff, as a former Pac-12 player, what is your, I don't know, let's say low-key Pac-12 memory that maybe wasn't the greatest performance in the world, maybe wasn't the most memorable, but something that sticks out to you?
I really think that Washington State, UCLA, Pac-12 for dark game just like sums up our conference so well. Mm-hmm. Like it just was like the best of everything. The wildness, the craziness, the offense, and just everything that we love about the Pac-12 conference. Like it just was everything. You 49 to 17, they come all the way back. Mm-hmm. My favorite moniker, by the way, Dan, is the Conference of Champions because we've won.
Because somebody has to be a champion every year.
We've won one football game and one championship since 05 was the last one, and basketball's been 97. We're just sticking with it.
That's Arizona.
Conference of Champions.
Miles Simon.
Yeah, there he is. Mike Bibby, Eugene Edgerson.
Yep.
And
Michael Dickerson.
Yep.
It's just been. It's just a bummer, man. All this is. It's just all stinks.
Brandon, from your perspective as somebody who follows recruiting, is there a West Coast or Pac-12 recruiting memory?
I mean, the one that'll always kind of resonate on the Richter scale, and I know this will make Dan and Jeff happy, was easily when DeAnthony Thomas picked Oregon. Like that was, you can go back to Halati Nada, how big of a victory that was, but USC was starting to cook by that point. I mean, Kiffin, it was doing well coming off the heels of Pete Carroll leaving. You had Robert Woods already, and they were getting every kid they wanted in Los Angeles. And we could use Deshaun Jackson, but Oregon getting DeAnthony Thomas was like the hugest paradigm shift, the seismic recruitment, because a year later they get Eric Armstead, who was one time committed to USC. And it was 2 years in a row, but the DeAnthony one, this Los Angeles legend, that was the one to me that kind of showed, okay, Oregon is no longer just this cute little program that people think is all Nike back. No, they're a real legitimate. And again, this is a month after they had played for a national championship. But to get DeAnthony Thomas, that was like, I feel, their national recruiting arrival moment. And it's been pretty much that same way for the last 12 years.
Can we talk
Sorry, continue, Jeff.
Can we laugh for a second, Dan, Brandon? I mean, Andy can laugh with us at this notion that USC did not want Oregon in the Big Ten because of recruiting. Like, and that's been talked about for a while now, and it finally came out. Like, that's the funniest thing of all time because USC prides itself on like, we won championships and we win the conference, and
we're
like
the big dog.
Oregon has 0. They're the 0. The O represents 0. They've won. Why do you care then? Like, what's the concern with Oregon? It's the funny. It was the funniest shit, man. And it's true. They did not want Oregon in the Big Ten because of recruiting purposes. And it's the funniest thing. It'd be like there's no parallel. Like Georgia being like, I don't want so and so. You'd be like, you'd laugh at them. Be like, Georgia, why do you care?
The Big 12,
Georgia,
the Pac-12,
Florida, Auburn, Alabama, and LSU would not like Florida State in the SEC for recruiting purposes.
Well, the thing is, the Big Ten's now under new management, so here we are.
Andy Staples from On3, Andy Staples Show, has traveled this great land, has watched bajillions of hours of college football, as we all have. When you think Pac-10, Pac-12, any sort of combination thereof, who are the names, faces, and games that you immediately think of?
Reggie Bush,
of course.
I think definitely. Because remember, I grew up in the South, did not really get my exposure to the wider world until I got to college and started watching a lot of that stuff from the other coast. And so, Reggie Bush came along shortly after I graduated from college, and that was when USC just ruled. But trying to think of my first Pac-12 game. I think my first year at SI, or no, it was my second year at SI. I went out because I got a really good deal on a plane ticket to Portland and drove down to Eugene for the Civil War with a Pac-10 title on the line. They stormed the field. LeGarrette Blount played. Like, it was a big deal.
Yes, that's right. He comes back in that game.
It would have been 09, right?
It was
09, yeah. Yep.
At the Thursday night game too, or I think
it was.
Foley had some massive drive that won it.
Yeah,
I think they were wearing throwbacks, I want to say.
Yeah, they're wearing the green top, the white pants, the yellow helmet.
Yep. It was incredible. It was the atmosphere was awesome. It was obviously my first time at Autzen, and I loved it. And so I was thinking about that game, and I've been arguing with people online, like, guys, you can still play that game. Just because Oklahoma and Oklahoma State aren't going to be able to figure this out,
right,
doesn't mean you can't. It can be beneficial for Oregon and Oregon State. The Apple Cup can still be beneficial for both parties. Like, you can still play those games.
Florida State play, Clemson, South Carolina play. There's
and I think that's where it comes from for me, having gone to Florida. Like, so Florida, Georgia is akin to Oregon, Washington in terms of rivalry.
Yes.
Florida State would be like your Oregon State or your Washington State.
Just to name some names specifically, I want to say that was Jeremiah Masoli to Jeff Mail over the top on a
correct. That's right.
There we have the Masoli. I'm trying to remember
Sean
what else
Canfield was the quarterback for Oregon State.
Sean Canfield, who I remember Sean Canfield threw for like thousands of the most meaningless yards. I want to say he threw for a ton, but like it was like at 5 yards per attempt, and it's good for Sean Canfield.
I was just gonna throw this out there real quick. I'm gonna depart. I want to watch you guys do this, but this, that kind of tweet that was memed for a while on the internet saying that men can just sit around and name random players.
That's what we're doing, Adam.
I didn't realize I could live this as a truth in my life, and I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity.
We've got so many left.
Oh yeah, I'll start putting them up on the screen as well.
Please do. I'm looking forward to watching.
Oregon State names, just because Andy brought up that game.
Rogers brothers.
Yeah. Jacquizz and James Rogers. It starts there. Stephen Paea.
Paea, yeah.
Ken Simonton.
He was so strong. I mean, Hushman Zada,
so those are Dennis Erickson teams.
Ken Simonton, Hushman Zada, Chad Johnson when he was still Johnson.
Who was the quarterback on that Fiesta Bowl team?
Jonathan Smith was the quarterback. It was
Jonathan Smith. And who did they end up playing in the Fiesta Bowl in 2000? Ty, you might look this up real quick, Ty.
Yeah.
Notre Dame game.
Alabama?
How dare you?
If you remember, too, there was this huge outcry.
It was Notre Dame. It was Ty Willingham, Notre Dame, and they got it was like 40-13 or something.
41-9, Dan. 41-9. We don't talk about it here.
They played again a few years later in the Insight Bowl with Derek Anderson at quarterback.
Yeah.
And, there's something about Notre Dame and Oregon State playing in the desert that never really boded well for the Irish. But those Oregon State teams, too. I mean, you had obviously the great receivers that they had with Hushmanzada and Ochocinco. But, the next year they were, I want to say Sports Illustrated had them picked number 1. And that was Ken Simonton was the starter. At running back, you had Jonathan Smith, and about halfway through the season, I think Dennis Erickson realized, hey, this Steven Jackson guy might actually be the dude at running back.
He was a monster. We were talking about him before we started the stream. Yeah,
that SI had a few of those, and when I got to work there, because I was like, oh, they just put who they really think is going to be number 1. No, they went contrarian number 1s, and there were a couple. Pac-10/12 contrarian number 1. Desert Swarm. Remember that cover?
Yep.
The original Desert Swarm cover?
4 somewhere in there.
It was 94. Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't there that famous cover where Joey Harrington has a sword and he's like stabbing the beaver?
Was that one? I remember Jason Fife. There's a name on the cover of that.
That's a good one.
That's when it was Rich, Cool, and 4-0.
I got Davis in the chat talking about USC linebackers, and he mentions Cushing. But Keith Rivers. Yeah. Lake Mary High School, Lake Mary Ram, like me. Very nice.
I had a friend in high school who was a diehard USC fan, and randomly bought the Keith Rivers jersey and would just wear it around and be like, why are you wearing like
This one does.
he had this obsession with Keith Rivers and would just wear it in like inappropriate situations, but was all about Keith Rivers.
But buddy, we played that defense. And let me tell you, we beat them in 07, but let me tell you, about 15 guys went to the NFL in the first 4 rounds of that defense.
Yeah.
So that's what Maluga.
So the defensive line was a young Everson Griffin, Cedric Ellis, Philly Moala, and Lawrence Jackson. And then Clay Matthews was young. Brian Cushing was young. Keith Rivers, Maluga, Thomas Williams was the 5th linebacker.
Hey, Kaluka Mayava was also playing that defense.
And then it was Taylor Mays, and it was Terrell Thomas, and Sharice Wright, I think, was there. Yeah, we beat him. So take that, USC.
How about a Matt Grudegood reference just to get it in before the show ends?
Which of his 8 seasons at USC were your favorite?
The first 7 were really the impact years. I still, with friends, if we're just saying names of guys, USC had, so on the good teams, fullback Brandon
Hancock.
And then the guy, I still say his name, and he is not a famous player at all, but he suffered, like, sometimes when guys like break their ankles in the middle of a game, Ryan Podrell had one of the uglier, I hope he's okay, but I will always remember that name because you were watching a random USC game. It was like, oh God, I hope he's okay. He wasn't. So I just like naming names.
Funny story about injuries. I remember asking Sark when he was the head coach at Washington. We were up watching Mercer Island play, and Jeff Lindquist was the quarterback who was there. And I'm totally blanking on the guy's name right now for whatever reason, but it was the guy who tore his ACL in the infamous 2005 Bush Push game because Notre Dame allegedly didn't mow the lawn on the field. And he was from South Hills High School in Covina. But we were talking with Sark and asked him, who was the best player he recruited at USC, assuming he's going to say Reggie Bush. And I cannot remember this guy's name for the life of me right now, but he said actually as a high school player, he was even more electric than Reggie Bush. And
Desmond Reed.
There you go.
Ask Googler. Yeah. He was there forever. He might have been a 5-6 year guy at SC.
Yeah. But another one of those guys that was overshadowed by the Lendale Whites and the Reggie Bush. I was out in Hawaii a couple weeks ago at the Under Armour camp, and Frosty Rucker and Winston Justice were both coaching at the event. So we're going back early 2000s.
Some other names that have bubbled to the surface here. I don't believe we've had a Jason Gesser reference yet.
Of course.
Wow.
Classic.
Also, Marcus Wheaton, while we're on the topic of Oregon State.
Oh, hated him. Him. I hated
2009.
Well, Brandon Cooks. I mean, it's one of the better players, but
of those Oregon State guys. There was another little Washington State quarterback pre-Leach. Are we talking about Alex Brink? Is that a name?
That's after Leach. I mean, pre-Leach. Yes.
Alex Brink.
Alex Brink,
I think I remember there was an Oregon safety who danced on the Washington W by the name of Keith Lewis.
Yep.
We need to go back to doing that this year.
Hey, city section guy like you, Jeff.
I know. We're going to get that. If we can dance on their logo again this year, I'd be very grateful for that.
Gentlemen, I got to go start my own emergency show, but hopefully I will. You got links. I might see some of you.
Yeah.
I'll be in there.
Love it. Thanks for stopping by.
All right, thanks for stopping by.
UCLA is near and dear. We mentioned a couple of the early 90s ones. UCLA is really funny to me because they produce some incredible players, but not incredible teams. Somebody dropped Miles Jack. I don't know if you put that in the stream, Ty, but Miles Jack, an all-timer. That was it was a Miles Jack, Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks.
Yes.
Jordan Zumwalt.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Yes. The thing about some of the Pac-12 schools, like Cal has like the 10th most NFL players like currently in the NFL. And they don't win nothing.
At a certain point, I think, so it was Clancy Pendergast was their defensive coordinator for Tedford, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think on that, there was some sort, I don't know if it was overlap, but you had Cam Jordan,
Brandon Mebane,
Alu. Who else?
Brandon Mebane, yeah.
Mebane was before those two, I think. Maybe there was a tiny bit of overlap, but not much. And Mebane played 12 years. And Cam Jordan's going to be a Hall of Famer. So,
Who is the recent edge guy for Cal who wore 88?
Evan
Big
Weaver?
white dude.
Evan Weaver.
Linebacker.
Evan Weaver. Yes.
Spokane, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. You have the Wilcox nothing but NFL secondaries going 6-6, 7-5 every year.
Hold on.
Yeah. We have.
It took us far too long, PJ, mentioning Kyle Bowler.
Kyle Bowler.
Gosh.
Classic Cal.
Wow.
And you know what? If we're going to talk about Hart High School quarterbacks, we can't forget Kyle Matter.
Of course.
Double Pac-10 quarterback Matt Moore.
Mm-hmm.
I love Matt.
So that's what, UCLA, Oregon State?
Yep.
Matt Moore?
Matt Moore.
Yep.
Imagine being Carl Durrell and deciding to ride with Drew Olson over Matt Moore.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine
Double Olsons at UCLA.
imagine being
right? Ben Olsen as
Oh
well.
yeah.
I'm going to give someone a stray for no reason here,
Please.
but imagine being Carl Durrell and taking Brian Abraham over Jeff Schwartz. That didn't work well for him as well. So that's one of those things. By the way, I've seen Carl Durrell plenty of times since then, and I don't think he even knows who I am. He's never mentioned it like ever, how he
No,
screwed up my
Yasuma.
recruiting.
Jeff,
Very
imagine being Brandon Huffman and ranking Sam DeMartinez and Charlie Carmichael over Mitchell Schwartz.
That's
I wanna see Charlie
Carmichael.
Carmichael Crespi High School and
No, him and Sam are both Notre Dame High School.
Oh,
Yeah,
Notre Dame High School.
yeah.
Who was the area? Okay.
Yeah. That's, I mean, look, I look up the rankings all the time. We've done on the radio show, we've looked at like the top of California rankings and see how many guys. It was actually a really good class in 2004. Like it was like Marshawn Lynch, I think, and maybe Deshaun Jackson was that year as well. It's actually a really loaded California class, but we joke all the time about like who made it and who did not. It's fun. It's very fun to look at it.
There's a nice little run of Stanford running backs, I want to say. So you've got Gerhardt, Stephen Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Tyler
Gaffney.
Gaffney,
Yeah.
Bryce Love.
Yeah.
Like Stanford has quietly built up quite like the running back history in the last, I guess it's it's during and post Harbaugh. Can they're running behind? Okay, so some of the bigger. So you got Jonathan Martin,
David DeCastro.
Yep, David DeCastro.
Garnett.
Oh my God, who are some of the recent big?
Garnett won the Outland. Walker Little, yeah, he was real recent. But Garnett won the Outland Trophy. But
Josh Garnett Garnett was in the same class as Zach Banner.
Yep.
USC Giants.
Oh, another guy in that same class, Kyle Murphy, who started at tackle for Stanford.
Yeah.
I want to say, I don't know if it's the same class, but something I always appreciate because the West Coast does not produce giant humans in the way that other regions produce giant humans, all due respect to the Schwartz brothers. Damian Mama, I think weighed in like 4 bills-ish coming in.
He was asking if he could be listed at 380 just to be kind.
Jeff is looking at the camera saying, "Are you allowed to do that?"
So here's the deal for people who are watching. We are kind of sharing stories of the Pac-12. If you're just joining in, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. Make sure you also subscribe to the podcast. We'll make sure that there are links in the chat to that. Yes. We've got Brandon and Jeff with us now. If there are others that you wish for us to invite,
tell me who to invite. I don't.
Let us know in the chat. We are willing to send out invites to pretty much any notable media member, former player, what have you, blogger.
I sent one to Ryan Leaf.
Yeah, we sent one to Ryan Leaf
or something.
Anybody who might have a take on the Pac-12, we're willing to pull them onto this stream. So let us know in the chat if that's something you're interested in.
I have a bunch of Oregon people, but like I don't want to make this too Oregon heavy. I can just review all of the people that destroyed my heart throughout the years. Like we're gonna go this far without mentioning Dennis Dixon. Pittsburgh High School?
Yeah, Pittsburgh High School. Yeah.
San Leandro High School.
From
San
Pittsburgh.
Leandro.
Yeah, he's from Pittsburgh though.
Here we go. Here's a story that someone has shared. The story of Mike Leach contacting Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
I have a great Mike Leach story, by the way. So, I do Pac-12 radio, and on commitment day, we have coaches on, and so we called Mike Leach on commitment. I'm doing the night show, right? So he's very clearly at a party, at a recruiting party, probably had a couple adult beverages, and the SID should not have handed him the phone. All right. And he didn't want to do the interview. It was like very clear. And he did the whole like, I can't hear you. There's too much break, and just hung up on us. And it was like the funniest thing of all time. We're like, "Hey, coach, how you feeling today?" He's like, I can't really, I can't hear you guys, but like, I don't know, we're recruiting party. It's going well. We're happy with our Cougars. And then I asked him another question. He's like, I don't know. I can't hear anything. Hung up. I was like, it was just like the most perfect, like the SID should never hand him the phone. It was like a waste of time, but it's perfect Mike Leach.
I sent Mike Leach a text message once to come on the show, and he just called me to ask what a podcast was and said, sure. That was fun.
The last time I saw Leach at Pac-12 Media Day, I just asked him about Pirates, and we talked for like 30 minutes. Nothing about football. I just was like, tell me about Pirates, coach. He's like, here we go.
I don't know if you guys remember the first Pac-10 media, or I guess it was first Pac-12 media day that Leach was at. It was at
there.
Universal Studios. In
Yes.
fact, Dan, I think that was where you and I met for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody asked him a question about, it might have been the mascot question, or the
mascot
if they jumped out of the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you just knew this guy was going to be a complete treat to cover in the Pac-12. But I always really think about it, especially in the last 2 years as the Pac-10's fallen apart. At Pac-10 Media Day in 2010, it was on the field at the Rose Bowl in the middle of August or early August. There was no covering, no air conditioning. Obviously, it's on the field, and they were super excited to announce Colorado and Utah would be coming in the next year. But just that might have been the all-time high for the Pac-10 in terms of the anticipation and the excitement. And as people started to melt about halfway through the Pac-10, somebody found a box of Rose Bowl championship game hats from the Alabama-Texas game and started throwing them out to the media members there who were baking. And maybe then we should have taken it as a sign that sometimes their really put together plans did not end up going as well as they thought they would.
Okay, so you mentioned Colorado joining. Obviously, they're moving on to a different conference, as everybody's going to be. It was Colorado where Lane Kiffin had the weird jersey special teams swap thing. That he didn't know how to execute a jersey swap and tried to sneak something. I also want to say there was a football incident with Lane Kiffin relatively early on. Now I forget what it is.
I love that because Oregon scored last year in a jersey swap with an offensive tackle playing tight end.
That's true.
Oh, yes. Josh Connolly.
Colorado. Yeah.
Oh, my God. I always will treasure. Okay, well, I was just thinking about something with Washington. So Washington was really good right around the turn of the century. Then things went poorly. They go 0-12. We can't do a Pac-12 remembrance show without mentioning that Washington went 0-12. I want to say a Washington receiver, all due respect, Reggie Williams demolished teams. And so that would have been, who is his quarterback? I can see his face.
It was Cody Pickett, but the game that kind of helped put Taylor Barton on the map was when Taylor Barton and Reggie Williams connected to beat USC on Pete Carroll's first year at SC. If you remember that year, I think they lost to USC or to Washington on the last second field goal. They had a fumbled punt or a fake snap or something that went wrong against Notre Dame. And Bill Plaschke wrote what a terrible hire that was, and then wrote his infamous Los Angeles is a UCLA football town.
Yes, as we all know.
And I don't think USC ended up losing again for the next 9 years, and UCLA didn't win again for like the next 9 years.
And I'm looking this up to make sure, by the way, but the Huskies went 0-12 with Jake Locker starting like 4 of the first games.
Yes.
They also lost to BYU because he got the unsportsmanlike penalty after tying the game, and they were down by 1. The kick got blocked. It was perfect Washington.
I want to say UCLA took out an advertisement in the Neuheisel era in the LA Times with Rick Neuheisel looking official and pointing and saying that the headline in the ad said the LA dynasty is the USC or something like the college
monopoly is over.
Dynasty is over.
Yes.
And then people Photoshop that with there as Rick Neuheisel pointed. And I loved it.
They held on to Dwayne Walker as their defensive coordinator and hired Norm Chow. So surely it was going to trend. But while you talked about that 0-12 Washington game, I mean, Hronis Grasu deserved all the attention that he got. But Nico Grasu kicked the walk-off field goal to beat Washington. And if you remember that game, we got to see the 4-inch vertical jump of Paul Wolf as he celebrated, and he might have not even gotten 4 inches off.
There's a ding.
How can you have a Pac-10 bonfire without mentioning Paul Wolf from Washington State?
Yeah, I'm trying to. Okay, so if you're going to go through a list of coaches, we're just like, he was never going to be him. He was never going to be that guy. You got Gary Anderson.
Oh, God.
You got Ty Willingham.
Oh, yeah.
0-12, you're in that. Like Sumlin was a really bad hire. Carl Durrell ended up as a really bad hire.
John Malkovich.
John Malkovich.
Yes, John Malkovich. What do you want? You have a conversation about Walt Harris at Stanford.
Buddy Stevens.
He recruited me. I think it was Walt Harris recruited me to Stanford. I was like, this ain't going to be good.
Yeah. By the way, Paul Wolf's career record in 4 years, 4 seasons at Washington State, 9-40, a winning percentage of 184. Not good. Not great.
Steve Sarkisian, but that was more off the field, but that was pretty short tenured. I
remember Paul Hackett wasn't great.
Oh, yeah.
Paul Hackett was pretty bad. And that was okay. So USC hires Pete Carroll, who is arguably the best coach ever in the Pac-10, Pac-12 modern-ish era, right? Since like the 90s anyway. He's allegedly the 4th choice. And it's, I want to say, Mike Riley. I think Mike Bellotti was in that conversation. I don't know who the 3rd one
Dennis
was.
Erickson.
Dennis Erickson.
They were coming off that season. And remember, Riley really wanted the job, but the Chargers owners, the Spanos brothers, wouldn't let him out of his contract. And it's also funny to look back a few years later where Mike Riley turned down a job at a school in the SEC because his wife wanted him to come back to the West Coast and thought it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to get hired at UCLA. They ended up hiring Carl Durrell, and that school down south ended up hiring Mike Price from Washington State.
Yes.
And hired Mike Shula because Mike Riley turned down Alabama to take the UCLA job. At the time, he wanted his wife. They were, I think, at the New Orleans Saints. And think about how much college football might have changed in that respect if Mike Riley had gone to Alabama.
Some random coaches in the Pac-12 here. We've got somebody mentioned Buddy Stevens already, which is a good pull.
Jimmy Lake.
We have Tim Kish, who had a cup of coffee with Arizona. We also had a mention in the chat for Mark Helfrich, not quite as random as some of these names, but I don't believe mentioned John Embry. To the pantheon of really bad coaches.
Was real bad. I remember the story about John Embry was he did an interview after the fact or during the fact to sort of explain how behind Colorado was. And he was like, we don't have enough money for chairs. That was like a point John Embry made about Colorado football. And at that point, I was like, I don't know if I'm buying Colorado.
They don't have money to pay their coach, right? They didn't have, they're like, well, we'll find the money somewhere.
Yes. Yeah.
By the way, have you ever heard an AD say that before? Like, I don't know, we'll find money for the coach somewhere after they sign the new coach?
No, that is not something I've heard. Oh, by the way, with Colorado, even though they were only in the conference for about 10 years, some great names from Colorado. So you've got a secondary that was like 3 of the 4 guys were drafted one year. I couldn't name any of them. Brandon
Probably. Weatherspoon was one of them.
So you got Sefo. Yes.
Oh, yeah, Sefo.
So you got Sefo, followed up by what? Scott, Ty calls him Stevie Montez.
Yeah,
Stevie Montez,
Texas.
You've got arguably, I don't know, one of the best 5 receivers in the history of the Pac-12. So the last 12 years, and Laviska Shenault, when healthy, he was fully unguardable. There were some dudes at Colorado. That's all of them I can name off the top of my head, though.
Laviscus gave one of the best answers at Pac-12 Media Day of all time for me. When we're like, buddy, you have like, and to be fair, Travis Hunter basically said the same thing this last time. But we're like, you have so many things you do, right? You're in the slot, you're out wide, you're at running back. Like, do you study anymore? Do you have to do anything extra? And Travis Hunter was the same thing. It's like, just kind of comes natural to me. I'm just like good at it. And he gave a much better answer. He gave like a mature, like, I'm just good at it. I practice like I have to, but I'm good. And Laviska was like, nah, let's go play football. And I was like, you don't like doing. I was like, nah, just like they tell me to play and I just go do it. I was like, all right, whatever. Like we were shocked that he didn't say like, no, I got to study the playbook a little bit more. I got to get my coaches, just nothing. Like, nope, no, I'm fine.
Evan Kraft, 4 interceptions in 1 half and a winning effort. That's an underrated storyline. UCLA's string of quarterbacks who now work at Home Depot. So it's all due respect to Home Depot. There was another Kevin in there, was there not?
Kevin Prince. From Crespi High School. You just saw a couple names. And Ty mentioned Tim Kish. I mean, some of the great interim coaches in Pac-10 history. You got Marcus Tuiasosopo, Jed Fish. You had Keith Gilbertson, who turned it into a 2-year gig, and they ended up hiring Tyrone Willingham after Keith Gilbertson, but he was a coach at Cal. Took over for Bruce Snyder when Snyder went to Arizona State. Again, going back to the 90s reference. But other legendary interim
Dante
coaches.
Williams.
Yeah, Dante Williams, Ed Orgeron.
Yep.
Clay Helton. And that's why you never let your players tweet about who the next head coach should be hired. Clay Helton. Those are just the ones off the top of my head. Who was the high school? He's a high school coach now. Oh, Jake Dickert. Yes.
Dickert, and he gets the full-time gig. You have Lane Kiffin on the tarmac, by the way. Davis Mikondichi or whatever. I screwed that up. He's dropping heaters in the comments in terms of names right now. But I don't know if you want to, because he mentioned Vita Vea. I don't know. Is Vita Vea from the West Coast?
Yeah, Milpitas High School.
So Northern California. And was he a high school running back? I want to say
played running back, and he was an interesting story. He was a late signee for Washington. I remember going to Milpitas High School. And I went from there to College of San Mateo, and the defensive coordinator at College of San Mateo said, hey, we're not sure Vita Vea is going to graduate. We're super excited to get him here at CSM. It's 10, 15 minutes. And Tosh was able to get him into school, and the rest is history. But was a high school running back and a big old gigantic kid. But another, there was a stretch there where the Bay Area had produced guys like Joe Mixon and Vita Vea, and Cal just could not bring those guys in because they hired a head coach named Sonny Dykes who had all his ties down in the Southeast or Southwest. And they could not recruit anybody from the West Coast. And the Bay Area was at like its peak in terms of talent before they fired him. But remember, this is also a conference that Cal had a coach get fired for getting with a prostitute. I want to say he was a receivers coach. So who could forget stories like that in the Conference of Champions?
Can I call out my favorite memory?
Please.
I don't have the West Coast roots like you guys do, but when I think of the Pac-12, I think of this.
Of course.
Oh yeah, God, that's more fans than Cal has seen in 20 years. Look at that thing.
I tried to put the GIF in, I tried to put the video in, it didn't work on our software, but the still frame captures it all. Everybody watching this knows exactly.
I'm being serious. When's the last time Cal had that many fans in the end zone for a game?
When they played Ohio State a few years ago.
Oh, so that was a Kenny Guyton Ohio State game because Braxton Miller was suspended for a game, I want to say.
And Auburn comes to Cal this year.
Auburn does go to Cal this year.
That's a weird non-conference.
Week 2. It's a very weird week 2 game.
It's a weird non-conference game, right?
Cal,
Auburn
by the way,
Cal?
Cal in general is a very strange game. There's no parking lot. It's a game day. Like you just walk up a hill and there's a stadium and then you leave. It's very strange.
Hey, speaking of interim coaches, Jeff, you'll appreciate this one. How can we not mention Ed Kazarian, the winningest coach in UCLA history? The towel.
The towel, man. I mean,
shout out David Woods for that reminder.
UCLA, like them being dragged in the Big Ten to me is also really funny because they don't care. Like they want the money to get out of debt, but no one at UCLA cares at all what conference they're playing in. Zero fucks given. Excuse my language.
He's not wrong. So the Marshawn Lynch picture brings to mind. So you've got a run of Cal running backs.
Yes.
Stanford and Cal produced. You have J.J. Arrington, Javid Best, Marshawn Lynch. I'm sure there's somebody else.
Shane Vereen.
Shane Vereen's a very good pull.
Punch in the NFL.
Yeah.
And Jaden Ott's good now.
Jaden Ott is good now. It's the Pac-10-12 is the only conference, as far as my calculations, that has recently fired a coach on the tarmac. That counts as something special. You've got, I'm trying to think if there's Utah. You got the Lotulelei brothers. Were there two of them?
Yep. Star and Lowell.
Utah has been in the conference for 12 years. Have they developed a big play receiver in that time?
No.
Darren Carrington. Oh, wait, sorry.
Yeah. And I don't know how often he actually went down. You've got, there's, I think, as far as I can tell, one coach since the 80s or 90s that has coached for 3 different Pac-10-12 teams. Head coach?
Is that Neuheisel?
I don't think it's. Oh, Neuheisel has, but Colorado wasn't in. Conference when he was there.
So they've been the head coach for 3 Pac-12 teams.
I think so. Maybe there's more than because Sark
Erickson was ASU and Oregon State
and Wazoo.
Oh, and Wazoo. That's right.
Wazoo. Dennis Erickson.
He's at Wazoo.
He was in the late before Miami, I believe.
Right.
He was at Wazoo.
I feel bad for Wazoo in Oregon State. It's like it's not their fault, man. They're in Pullman and Corvallis.
Oh, Justin Forsett.
Someone dropped that.
Yeah, there was. I think at one point the Bears. Cal had one Sunday. They had 4 running backs starting in playoff games that weekend, and it was like Forsett with the Seahawks, Lynch with maybe the Bills, Vereen was starting a game, and I think Arrington was on one of those teams. I mean, that was for a guy who loved to throw the ball like Tedford. He sure did crank out running backs.
Those guys.
I gotta run, guys.
All right.
All right,
Take it
Jeff.
easy. Thank you
Take
for
care,
your
everyone.
contributions. Oh,
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye, guys.
Kalen Clay. That's not nice.
Hey,
Kalen
Brandon, let
Clay.
me ask you a question about recruiting.
Yeah.
I know we've been looking back a lot, but one question I did want to ask you is, I just wonder, like, to what end do recruits care about the news of today? Like, obviously, they might be playing a little bit farther from home, but from the standpoint of Oregon or Washington, maybe it's more exposure on the national stage. Like, help us kind of like understand how recruits parse this news.
I think back to a quote Mike Locksley made a couple weeks ago where he said, when they were talking about facilities and the arms races, he said, kids will get changed in a trash can if they can make $20,000.
Right.
Where I think, the 90s are done. Nobody cares about location anymore. You look at the NFL draft where you see Bryce Young and CJ Stroud go back to back. Southern California guys who played at the SEC and the Big Ten schools. I don't think it's as big of a deal as a lot of traditionalists are going to say, as a lot of coaches are going to say. I think kids now know if they got a good NIL deal or they got an opportunity to play and be exposed to playing in the NFL, they don't care if that's on the other side of the country. I mean, heck, Florida State might be playing games in the Middle East for all we know in the near future, and they'll go play that if there's an opportunity to get NIL out of it or to get an NFL chance. So I just don't think it's that big a deal. If anything, it might open up a couple more inroads for the former Pac-12 schools that are now recruiting the Midwest. We saw Dante Moore mention UCLA going to the Midwest to play as a part of it, but I just don't think it's that big of an issue. If anything, those West Coast schools should be a little bit more worried that schools that, you have an Ohio State and a Michigan, Notre Dame that have grabbed players from the West Coast historically, but now it kind of makes the West Coast even that much more open game.
That's true. That's true. If you don't really have the option to stay home and play all your games on that coast, then look, if you commit to Oregon, you're also committing to Minneapolis and Bloomington and State College. And so that's might as well go to Alabama. You might as well go to Texas. You might as, there's no selling point that it's easier.
Ty, I think, as somebody's watched Notre Dame like you have all these years, I mean, they've always had to recruit on a national scale. USC's had a national brand, but Oregon has had to recruit nationally. They're not going to go play games, in the Northeast, or they weren't before. Now they get Rutgers in Maryland, but they were recruiting the Northeast. They were recruiting the South. And so I think college football has, as we talk about how sports and professional sports has become global, I truly believe college football has become national. And I'm stating the obvious here when you have the super conference trend that we have, but I think recruiting has just changed so much in the last 5 to 7 years where it's no longer about region. Kids don't care about playing for their local hometown school like you might have in the 90s or in the 2000s, where those local kids didn't leave. And if they did leave, it was the rare kid that went to a Notre Dame because he went to a Catholic school. It was the rare kid that, that went to Michigan just because he grew up watching them. But the LA kids stayed in LA, the Texas kids stayed in Texas, the Florida kids stayed in Florida. Now it's so national that, Mario Cristobal is recruiting the Northwest when he's in Florida. Well, because it's not as easy to keep those kids down in the South as it was 15, 20 years ago, or when he was a recruit of his own.
What about from the coaching standpoint? Do the coaches care about this?
I think the coaches of the schools that are having a safe landing don't care. I think they're looking forward to having a new region to recruit or new opportunities. I think the schools that don't have a landing spot, they're worried because maybe that was their ace in the hole. If you were Jake Dickert or Jonathan Smith, you at least had the Pac-12 to sell. Now there's so much uncertainty. I mean, Troy Taylor now has an extra thing. I mean, he's going to be able to sell the 40-year decision, but at what cost? What's Justin Wilcox selling? And so it's those schools that have been kind of ditched, so to speak, that their job just became that much more difficult. And, you're now trying to keep your 2004 or 2024 class together with so much uncertainty, and you just don't have an answer for them.
By the way, if Dan Lanning and Kalen DeBoer are both as good as they appear to be becoming, those are two enormous wins because traditionally speaking, Washington and Oregon lose good coaches or lose winning coaches, however you want to view the guys that those guys have lost. Most recently for Washington and losing Sark to USC and Oregon with Mario Cristobal. If you are playing in one of the big two, if you're paying and you're winning, should be able to hold on to them. Should be. So
let me share a story with Zach sent in RJ Southerd.
Of course,
which is a classic name. Dan, you know my RJ Southerd story, right?
Yeah.
So my RJ Southerd story is I was a freshman, I want to say, in college. I think that timeline checks out, but it was around that period of my life. And maybe towards the end of high school. Regardless, RJ Southerd was kind of coming into his own as a receiver. And I, at the time, I should say, was not like Chris. It was still okay to be like into Chris Berman and his nicknames.
It's still okay.
Oh yeah,
it's still okay. It's lost a little bit of the luster, but
yeah.
I physically wrote a letter into Chris Berman suggesting that he use RJ Sweet and Soured,
of course,
as his nickname. And about 3 weeks later, he started using it.
Look at you.
I never got attribution for that from Boomer.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was the reason for it, but I do know that I sent it in. I do know that people can vouch that story for me, and that he did start using RJ Sweet and Soured. So that's
I'm going to go, while we're on the subject of the Sowards, I'm going to go a little bit old school right now.
Okay.
And I will talk about the great 1990s. And in a span of about 6 weeks, the Rose Bowl cursed the Southerd family. In the USC-UCLA game that year, USC had a 38-21 lead and blew that lead. Jeff talked about it, the double overtime game in 1996. And RJ Southerd was going off in that game. But in the double overtime on a 3rd and 6, RJ Southerd dropped the ball that would have given USC a first down and a chance to win, and they ultimately lost. On that same side of the field, 6 weeks later, Joe Germain threw a touchdown pass that I want to believe it was Marcus Southerd who was covering the receiver who scored that touchdown with a minute left. And Arizona State came down, ran out of time, but didn't have a chance to win. And then the next night, Florida beat Florida State in the Sugar Bowl, costing Arizona State a national championship. But 6 weeks before, RJ Southerd looked into the camera on ABC and said, 5 years in a row, it ends today. Drops a touchdown or a first down pass that would have won the game or at least kept the USC's chance alive. And then his brother gives up a touchdown that cost Arizona State a national championship. So it was a rough 6 weeks there, but that was 1990s Pac-10 football at its finest between, when you guys are, you're old enough where you remember what the bowl days were like on New Year's Day. And I was texting with a buddy the other day about when I was spoiled as a kid. I mean, you'd wake up, you had the 8 o'clock Outback Bowl on the West Coast, 8 a.m. on ESPN. At 9 o'clock, you'd have the Gator Bowl or the Hall of Fame Bowl on NBC. You had the Citrus Bowl on ABC, and you had the Cotton Bowl on CBS. Then in the afternoon, you'd have the Rose Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl. And then at night, you'd have the Sugar Bowl and the Orange Bowl. Then there'd be that one random Peach Bowl on the second. But you'd wake up to just a smorgasbord of outstanding football on New Year's Day. And I feel like that's we're 30 years from that era. But that was what made college football so beautiful and romantic to a 15, 16-year-old kid.
Watching Ron Dane on one of those giant square projection big screens.
Yes.
Destroy 1999 Stanford, I want to say, in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah. Yes.
Would have been 50.
Todd Husak, baby.
Yeah. Yes, Todd Husak. Yeah, I sat in the end zone in that Rose Bowl. So that would have been a Barry Alvarez Rose Bowl for Wisconsin. I don't remember who else. Oh, there was a tiny receiver for Stanford who set records.
Troy Walters.
Troy Walters. Thank you very much. And he didn't do much in that game, if I remember correctly.
There's zero milliseconds of lag time between you
I'm
and
giving Brandon I'm not giving him hints, but I'm leading him up.
He's an encyclopedia.
Walters was hurt. And see, again, I was old enough to remember, he was hurt for much of that December, and there was still worry that he was even going to get to play. And then he had the wrist injury, I think, that he suffered. And that was when the Pac-10 was so mediocre that I want to say Stanford went to the Rose Bowl with an 8-4 record that year. And, the year before you got UCLA, who was potentially weeks away from a national championship berth. Arizona needed UCLA to beat Miami for them to sneak
Oh,
into
that
their
was the
first Rose Bowl.
postponed game.
It
There was an
a postponed
actual
game.
hurricane in Florida, so the game gets postponed to the end of the year. All UCLA has to do with defensive coordinator Nick Aliotti is just beat a good Miami team. Miami was very good, but it was in Miami, and I want to say Edgerrin James rushed for 489 yards. Something
and that was just
crazy.
the first half.
Yeah.
But UCLA had a 17-point lead, and Brian Pulley-Dixon just inexplicably dropped the ball, and it allowed Miami to rally. And you talk to UCLA fans, and they'll tell you that two of the most pivotal moments in UCLA football history involved Brian Pulley-Dixon. He was dropping that ball, but then 3 years later against USC, him dropping a pass, walking off, and I forget the DB's name for USC, but he pinned the ball against his leg and took it back for an interception. And Pete Carroll's first year wrapped with a 27-0 victory over UCLA. And then they won the Pac-12 for like the next 136 years. And Brian Pulley-Dixon a week later, because that was the 9/11 season, where their game from early in the season got postponed, got booed on senior day for the final inept play that he made. But yeah, it's crazy to think in 1998, UCLA and Arizona were the top two teams in that conference. And by UCLA losing to Miami, it knocked Arizona out of the Rose Bowl. So they went to the Holiday Bowl, and it kept this little plucky school from University of Central Florida and Dante Culpepper out of a bowl game entirely because they were an independent.
Yes.
You guys, I've been training for this moment to talk
I know.
1990s football my whole life.
I'm trying to think if there's any other deep cuts that I want to ask you about game wise. I mean, there's so many like individual moments that have come to define Pac-10 and Pac-12 football. Obviously, you got Jake Plummer and the Arizona State teams. I'm trying to think of Arizona specific memories that don't haunt me personally. I mean, we haven't mentioned Khalil Tate, who kind of came out of nowhere to be just a complete star. You have Kadeem Carey dominating at Arizona. Those Rich Rod teams were crazy fast. I'm trying to think of Arizona receivers that I hated tremendously, and I can't think of a single name. I mean, you got Gronk at Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
I remember a Gronk game in Eugene that I think Oregon won. He was like triple teamed. It was just not happening. It was not happening. Any guys stopping Gronk.
A Trunk candidate if we're going old school Arizona running backs.
Of course. Yeah. I'm trying, and then so you have a USC team because you mentioned Pete Carroll's first year. So you have, who is Carson Palmer's biggest target? Heisman year.
At that point, it would have probably been
because it's
freshman Mike Williams.
I was going to say it's Mike Williams.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I went to one of those games.
It's after Dwayne Jarrett.
Yeah, Dwayne Jarrett was after Mike Williams. That was
after
his
Mike
thing.
Williams.
He was gonna be the next guy.
That's right.
It was after you had Kareem Kelly, who had kind of been his go-to receiver. But yeah, that was Mike Williams' freshman year, and that was also the year. If you remember that game that they had went 6-5, beat UCLA, but then they lost in the Vegas Bowl to Utah on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day with the legendary Sonny Bird playing running back for USC.
I remember, and I'm going to get this right, Ty. I'm going to impress you, Ty, and I'm going to impress Brandon Huffman. Pete Carroll's first big recruiting win that indicated that he was going to be a force on the West Coast, if not nationally. If I remember correctly, Sean Cody.
And I was talking about this with a USC fan about 2 weeks ago, and they will tell you that Sean Cody is still the single most important recruit that USC has signed in the last 25 years because he picked USC over Notre Dame, and he was the local kid that was the first guy to buy into Pete. And for the next, again, really go to Deshaun Jackson. And Deshaun Jackson might be the only Southern Californian that I can remember that USC wanted under Pete Carroll that didn't go to USC. Every other play, because D'Anthony Thomas was already a Lane Kiffin guy, but that kind of triggered that if USC wanted him, they would get him. And I mentioned Kaluka Mayava earlier. I mean, he would have been the best player in UCLA's recruiting class that year and turned out to be like the 20th best player in USC's class. And there was the running joke with Carl Durrell. He would offer a lot of guys that were good. Carl Durrell finds him and Pete Carroll signs him.
I want to say, so there's like a legendary 2004 USC recruiting class that like a bunch of dudes didn't work out, 4- and 5-star guys, and it didn't matter. Like Whitney Lewis. Ty and I were just talking about Whitney Lewis. Yeah.
Ventura stand up.
Yep. Ventura. There was, I'm thinking of USC. So like the big thing with USC is and Pete Carroll specifically, you mentioned the Sean Cody thing, but they recruited nationally in a way that they haven't since, in that you have, well, Leonard Williams was after Pete, I think, but what's his name? Big running back next to Reggie White. Reggie Bush. Lendale White, Colorado.
Oh, yeah, Lendale White, Colorado.
Louisiana.
Yeah.
Rest
Vidal
in peace.
Hazelton was a USC signing.
Vidal Hazelton. Wow.
Brian Cushing's from New Jersey.
Patrick Turner from Tennessee.
Mike Williams, Florida.
Yep. You mentioned Keith Rivers with Florida earlier.
Taylor Mays, Seattle.
Yep.
Troy Polamalu, Oregon. I don't know if that was Pete.
Jeff Byers, Colorado. Number one lineman in the country.
Yep. I remember. So that would have been like 2001-ish, 2-ish.
Byers was 2004, the first class that I covered. And people also forget, too, in that 2004 class, Jeff Byers was the number one ranked player in the country, but the number one ranked running back that year was Adrian Peterson, who took an official visit out to USC. Obviously, Oklahoma and Texas were more involved, but he took a visit out to USC, but USC had just signed Reggie Bush, Lendale White, and Chauncey Washington the class before.
Yes.
So there was a little bit in UCLA. He visited UCLA for an official. That was my first class, and Maurice Drew was a freshman that year. So, UCLA and USC were both dancing with Adrian Peterson, and he went to Oklahoma. But can you imagine a class signing Reggie Bush and Adrian Peterson back to back?
There was, just on USC running backs, I think there was an SI cover. At one point, USC had like 6 blue chip running backs on the roster. So it was Chauncey Washington, Emmanuel Moody, future Florida running back.
Yep.
Joe McKnight, I think, was in that range.
Mark Tyler,
Oaks Christian,
CJ Gable, and Stephon Johnson.
Oh my God, yes, Stephon Johnson and CJ Gable.
Are we predating Justin Fargas?
Fargas was late 90s.
Fargas was late 90s.
He was Michigan and then SC.
And he was part of those early SC teams under Pete.
Yeah, Notre Dame High School. But there was a run of SC national. I'm trying to think of any other names. Chris, the center from Arizona.
Chris O'Dowd.
Chris O'Dowd.
And think about it. SC was recruiting at such a high level at running backs. And you mentioned that class with Emmanuel Moody and CJ Gable and Stephon Johnson.
Yes.
They offered Toby Gerhart as a linebacker because they already had running backs in that class. So let's go recruit Toby Gerhart as a linebacker instead.
Norco. Yes.
Norco High School. Yes.
Norco High School. And you mentioned DeSean Jackson. I just remember this. Maybe I'm getting this completely wrong, but I've remembered it this way. Is DeSean Jackson, everybody, maybe you included, or if that's predating, I don't know. DeSean Jackson did an interview where he said, I was positive I was going to go to USC. And then everybody assumed I was going to go to USC. And then I said, you know what? Just to make everybody look silly, I'm going to Cal.
Greg Diggins.
I love that.
I work with Greg daily at 24/7 Sports. I've worked with Greg for a number of years. And that was in the old days of the college football signing day show with the late, great Gary Paskowitz, Lindsey Soto. And I still have this image of GB of just shock on his face where his mouth dropped when DeSean picked Cal. And he'll tell you that the two biggest shockers that he's ever covered in recruiting were that and the Lorenzo Booker picking Notre Dame or picking Florida State after the Notre Dame story ran on ESPN. And the Notre Dame Florida State thing with Booker, Greg was not on television, but he was for the DeSean Jackson one. And the look of shock on his face, I think it still haunts him to this day.
Oh my God. I'm trying to think now of any other West Coast recruits that I remember, like Brandon to this day, after he's made 9 figures in the NFL, will swear up and down that Eric Armstead made the wrong positional decision in playing the defensive line
on that hill,
where he has made $110 million playing a big end for the 49ers.
Could have been 210 if he had gotten to play left tackle.
And everybody assumed I think, was going to go to USC, where his brother Armand played.
Armand, he was committed there for about a year and decided ultimately to open it up. And I remember, talking with his dad, and they were getting their house renovated, so they couldn't host any in-home visits at their house. So they hosted it at a hotel nearby.
Okay.
And over the course of one day, you had new Washington defensive line coach Tosh Lapoy coming in, and they were trying to get
Shaq
Thompson in that same class. You had Cal, which was reeling because at one point Cal had a class that potentially included Ellis McCarthy, Jordan Payton, who both ended up at UCLA, Shaq Thompson, who announced for them at the Army All-American Bowl. and they were trying to get Armstead, but then Tosh leaves. So Cal was still trying to pull that rabbit out of their hat. UCLA had gone up to recruit him because Angus McClure had a connection there, and he ultimately picked Oregon. But 2 years in a row, Chip Kelly got the #1 player on the West Coast with DeAnthony Thomas and Eric Armstead. And then the other thing, Dan, that you may remember too is everybody assumed DeAnthony was going to have to play corner in college.
Yes.
And everybody thought Eric Armstead was better off playing off of the tackle. And what helped Oregon get both of those guys was the fact that Chip said, sure, if you want to play running back, DeAnthony, you can play running back. Sure, if you want to play defensive line, Eric, you can play defensive line. And it worked. Almost like being honest in recruiting sometimes helps.
Yeah. Oh, my God. And then there's a full circle element to Tosh Lupoi, because I want to say he was suspended while was he coaching at Cal? He was coaching at Cal before Washington.
Injury.
He coached his defensive lineman to fake injury in a game that Cal almost beat Oregon in, that I think Oregon only won because of a Cliff Harris punt return. And now he is the current linebackers coach and defensive coordinator for Oregon. But yes, Tosh Lupoi, famously like a get down, and is now at Oregon.
Was that an Arnold to the chopper voice?
It was.
Is that what that was? Okay.
It was. Any other recruiting story? Not that we're losing West Coast recruiting, but we're losing the overlap of so many schools playing each other, recruiting against each other. And as you said, everybody, you can go to Alabama and you can watch Clemson if you are sitting in Northern California and you're Joe Nagata. Is he from Northern
Folsom High School in Sacramento?
This is what you lose, Ty. This is what Brandon and I do off camera. We just text each other. We just text.
Is there one of the two of you that has dropped the most random name in text conversation?
Dan always wins.
I'm good.
Really?
He's really good. Like, I'll do a guy that was like an all Pac-10 performer, was maybe had a cup of coffee in the league.
Mm-hmm.
He will find the most random name. And he'll get it from, like, we're talking, these guys played on, Fox College Sports, 4:00 game with Yogi Roth and Steve Physiok and Samantha Steele on the sideline type of era.
Oh, there is. Yeah. What do you know about Alteron Werner? Like, there is. So this is truly, maybe we'll end on this. I don't know. But there is something about, because I know Brandon has been very generous this time. There is something that will forever be imprinted in my mind, because Brandon grew up near where I grew up, that when you open up the LA Times, shout out, Vincent Bonsignor, shout out, he might have been Daily News.
He was Daily News, but another Ventura High School product.
Yeah. It's Eric Sondheimer. There was a bunch of dudes, but Saturday morning, you get to read everything that happened in the high school games. And there'd always be guys, football, basketball, whatever sport, who'd be like, I'm sorry, Gilbert Arenas scored 63 points for Cleveland High School. And so there'd always be those guys, or Justin Fargas going for 250 or whatever for Notre Dame. So you'd see what happened, and then you'd see the day's games. And like, I wouldn't follow. I was, 12 years old. You didn't follow college football. So you're like, oh crap, Florida State's playing so-and-so. It's 12 against 8. And then bowl time. I remember, I don't know how bowl games were revealed back in the day, but bowl time, the LA Times had a big old, here are all the bowl games. And here's the little Blockbuster Bowl logo. Here's the little orange bowl guy. And that page, I just remember opening every year, because that's how we would all get our news. And that was such an incredible early December morning, seeing the bowl lineup.
Absolutely. And you'd have your 20 bowl games, and that was it. And you'd circle New Year's Day, because you're like, it's over. After this, it's over. On Sunday, I'm going to have to watch the NFL playoffs, and college football is done. I mean, that was an era where you had to wait until the day after signing day to find out who signed who. There was no recruiting websites. And there was something beautiful about getting the bowl game schedule. When Sporting News did their 32-page pullout with all the bowl games, those were the days, fellas.
The best. All right. On that note, Brandon Huffman, thank you so much for
thanks, fellas.
Way back at this bonfire with us. Just a bunch of names who did a bunch of things that we loved watching, and we're going to miss it dearly. There will still be high school football on the West Coast. There will still be college football on the West Coast, but not in the same way.
Never. I'm going to go pour one out right now.
I still haven't cracked it open. I'm about to crack open a beer. So
I'm on my way to meet some buddies to pour one out. So I'll
love it.
Salute you guys then. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
Take care, Brandon. That's Brandon Huffman.
Yes, the best.
Dude's an encyclopedia, man. He knows his Pac-12 better than anybody.
Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on? Because look, you've been to the West Coast 4 times, 7 times.
Yeah.
I don't know how often you've been to the West Coast. Obviously, you haven't been to you've never been to a Pac-10 or Pac-12 football game, right?
No.
Like between 2 West Coast teams.
No.
It's the things that I will always cherish is just going to piece of shit stadiums, which is what the West Coast for a long, like, you go to an Arizona State game in Tempe. I remember the first thing I did on video pre-SI, so it's the college football tour guide, was an Arizona State game, may have been Arizona State, Oregon, and it was before Arizona schools had to play September games at night, and they played it like September 1st, August 30th, whatever, and it was 109 degrees, and it's metal bleachers. Stanford had a piece of shit stadium. UCLA stadium is arguably still a piece of shit. USC has had a piece of shit stadium for a long time. Washington has always been pretty cool. Cal's long had a piece of shit stadium. And look, maybe that's a reflection of why the West Coast is where it is now.
Well, that's why they want to join the Big Ten to get that
Right.
money, fix up the stadium.
Oh my God. I remember I went to a ranked UCLA game at Stanford because I was in the Bay Area, and it was like 35, 40 minutes to Stanford. And I remember getting 50-yard line seats about halfway up for $23. You know, it was like something that it's just, but that's Stanford. That's what happens sometimes. So I treasure all that, the sort of grit and character that all these stadiums had.
I mean, my memories of the Pac-12 as like an East Coast college football fan, obviously from my standpoint, come a lot from Notre Dame USC. Or Notre Dame Stanford, and how those games would terrify me. I mean, they still terrify me.
Yeah.
Maybe not Stanford anymore, at least in the current iteration, but certainly playing USC last game of the year in the Coliseum.
Yes.
That is, I mean, a rivalry game. Carson Palmer won the Heisman because of that game, that when they smoked Notre Dame. Those night games against a team that you care about were always kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
Pac-12 After Dark had kind of taken on a life of its own.
Right.
I know one of our listeners bought, I think, Big Ten After Dark preemptively as, just seeing the writing on the wall that this is the thing that could happen. But watching those games kind of at all hours of the night, maybe before I followed college football to this extent. Yeah. There was always a certain charm to that. It felt like you were watching a broadcast from Mars. Or some otherworldly version of college football that, was going to mess up the rankings 24 hours later.
I especially remember early on, if they were just average, Notre Dame going to Stanford would terrify you.
Oh, all the time.
There was something like, it's a little too quiet in Palo Alto. It's like everybody kind of thinks the season's over. You just got to get this Stanford game, whatever. And then it would always be like, no, it's 31-30 with 6 minutes left. That was great. Those are great memories for me. I don't think I have anything else.
We've had a lot of awesome names and participation here.
Yes.
From the Verballerhood. We appreciate everybody stopping by. If you are finding us for the first time, or maybe you're watching live this whole time or for a chunk, or you're catching the rebroadcast, we'll leave this up for people if they want to take a stroll down memory lane after the fact. Please help us out by hitting subscribe and the bell so that you don't miss any of our videos. We also have a podcast, which you can find at solidverbal.com or anywhere you get your podcasts. We did do the emergency broadcast a little bit earlier today. That's now, I believe, publicly available. It should be for everybody out there if you want to go back and listen to what we had to say kind of in the immediate aftermath of all this. We would also encourage you to check out our Patreon at verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. We've got games out there. We've got all sorts of perks that we're just waiting to take the bubble wrap off of, hopefully in very short order. So we're kind of gearing up for the season here. It just so happens that this news sneaks up on us, even though we, in this case, we're kind of tipped off to it. It's been like the last couple Julys, Dan. I mean, I know this is August, but it's close enough. It seems like that's been the weird sweet spot for major breaking college football news. And obviously between the Fitzgerald stuff at Northwestern and now all the speculation around tectonic realignment like we had today.
Superconductors. Yeah.
Superconductors, little LK99 up in here.
Yeah.
Like we've just had so much to talk about. And
Florida
July
State to Serie A.
to Serie A. Yeah. It's been a tough month to kind of slink into any preseason mode. We've got to be on our toes here. So
yeah, while I don't necessarily celebrate the spirit of all of the news that has been happening, I certainly celebrate the ability to talk about something new and novel for another 3 weeks or so, because I'm going to throw all of this away and just bathe in football conversation soon.
That is a good place to leave it, Dan.
Yes.
Javid Best. A lot of people were throwing him out there. Do you have a random name to go out on?
I mean, I have a million, Ty. My random Oregon name is Blair Phillips, great linebacker for a terrible defense in 2006. My random other team name will be... Oh, I want to make this a good one, Ty. I want to make it...
I'll throw out Jeff Mail, by the way. I don't think
Jeff Mail's good. Jeff Mail's good. Somebody said N'Keal Harry, which was great.
We have a Nate Fisk. We have a John David Booty in the chat.
I like that.
Nick Reed. That's a good one. Jenny's been bringing the heat, too, with some of her names that she's been throwing out there. Rashad Bauman.
Oh, that's good. There's a lot of Oregon ones. I know Brandon mentioned Maurice Drew, who became Maurice Jones-Drew.
Nate Costa.
Nate Costa's good. Never really played. I really want to make this count. Okay. There was an Arizona State player who had like 9 touchdowns against Texas Tech and didn't really do that much after. Okay, hold on. Arizona State, not remembering the name is sort of beside the point, though. Touchdowns. Come on.
If I
can beat the commenters. Oh my God. So that's Nick Shimanek.
Kalen Balaj.
Got it. They beat me.
Benjamin, that was the one I threw out. Aaron Pflugrad, there's a good one.
Yeah, Taylor Kelly at Arizona State at quarterback.
Yeah, another mention from Ryan of Igor Olshansky.
Igor Olshansky is a good one. All right, that's as much as I can handle right now. I'm emotionally overwhelmed, Ty.
Folks, thanks for taking this journey with us. Hope the evening treats you well. Pour one out for the Pac-12. It's been real. It's been fun. It's been real fun. Make sure you subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.
Peace.